What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to America's Finest Sports. It's Monday. Matt and I are talking the NFL. We got a couple of different good segments for you guys. First off, we're going to be talking about a rival of the Chargers in the AFC West. We're going to be talking about the Las Vegas Raiders and whether or not we think, they are legitimate contenders because obviously they made a lot of changes in this offseason. But we want to talk about, whether or not Derek Carr and this team can really win the Super Bowl. And then we're going to get into a couple of other topics, do a couple of top fives, do a top five on top five running backs, do a top five on top five front sevens in the NFL. And we'll also be talking about Travis Etienne and how exactly he'll be used in Jacksonville and how effective he could potentially be, in his pseudo rookie season after he was, out for the year last year. But Matt, let's start it off. And I'm going to ask you a really simple question. Are the Las Vegas Raiders contenders this season?
I think they're going into it like with the assumption that they are a contender. Now, I think there's kind of two types of contenders in the NFL. There's playoff contenders and there's Super Bowl contenders. Are you a true Super Bowl contender? And you can always end up kind of getting close and kind of getting hot at the end of the year, similar to how the Bengals did last season, right? But the Bengals were more of a playoff contender heading into the year, and then they end up making the Super Bowl. So props to them, right? But I feel like heading into the season, I feel like we can say the Raiders are definitely, clearly playoff contenders. You go and you get Josh McDaniels, you bring in Derek Carr. I mean, you re-sign Derek Carr, you bring in Devontae Adams. You add a bunch to that offense, and you're like, okay, we're going to be this high-powered offense. We're going to be able to slug it out in the AFC West. Are they legit Super Bowl contenders? That's where it gets a little bit hard for me because I want to say yes because they got all these pieces. They got the veteran quarterback, and I think if you ask their fans would say yes. I think if you ask the team, anyone in the management, they would truthfully believe that they are Super Bowl contenders. But can we really look at the AFC West and go, yeah, all four of these teams are Super Bowl contenders? Because on paper, like overall, the Raiders are probably the worst. And that's not like to knock the Raiders. I still think they're probably over a 500 team. I think they still could make the playoffs if they're worse in that division. That's how good it is. But it's going to be really hard to expect them to go into that season and be true contenders and make a Super Bowl run because you have one of the most ridiculous divisions I've seen in my entire life in the AFC West. They're going to be in shootouts, 6 times a year with those teams. So I find it hard to call them true Super Bowl contenders. Are they close? Yeah. Are they a playoff contender? 100%. I think they should, I don't know if they should make the playoffs, but they should definitely be in the mix come the end of the season. But I don't know, just because of the division. I think if they're not in the division, I think you say yes. But just because of that division, it's going to be really tough for them to be legit contenders come the end of the year.
I think that's a fair kind of statement because, can a division have 4 Super Bowl contenders? I understand that it's most likely that not all of them are going to make the playoffs. But at the same time, I do think they're all Super Bowl contenders. I do think the Raiders are Super Bowl contenders. When I look at that division, and I look at the overall rosters, do the Raiders probably have the worst overall roster? I would probably assume yes. I think the Chiefs and the Broncos are the top 2. It's all very, very close though. But when I look at the quarterbacks, they're all quarterbacks that I think I can rely on. And Derek Carr is one of the most slept on quarterbacks in the NFL when it comes to clutch performances. When this guy, back, a few years back, and it was like, oh, Carr MVP. Then he got hurt, and then he, kind of struggled a little bit. But they also lost all their wide receivers. Initially it was Carr, Cooper, Crabtree. And, that wasn't the best wide receiver duo in the NFL, but Carr was like slinging with those guys. And then it was like, okay, here's Henry Ruggs. Go do that again. And it was like, come on, guys, I can't really do that. And he had Waller, he had Josh Jacobs, but he finally this offseason has gotten that guy. And he got Devontae Adams. And Devontae Adams, we know, the best wide receiver in the NFL. I think it's hands down. I think he's the best route runner in the NFL. He gets incredible separation. He's got very good hands. And he gets to pair that with Darren Waller. And he gets to pair that with a great slot wide receiver in Hunter Renfrow. Josh Jacobs and that run first, initially was John Gruden style of offense where it's like, oh, let's just pound the rock, and then we'll hit him with a spider 2 wide banana. Josh Jacobs is like the last piece in this offense, which I think is a benefit to this team. Because Josh Jacobs initially, it was like Josh Jacobs, the most inefficient 1 yard running back in the NFL, and he was supposed to be this. Oh, he'll get you a short yardage distance, but he like just could not get 3rd and 1, 4th and 1 goal line runs. Now I look at this team and I say, okay, what do they have? They've got a clutch quarterback that has proven he can do it game in, game out. They've got an elite wide receiver. They've got an elite tight end. They've got, I think will be a very solid coaching staff. And finally, they got game breakers on the defense. Max Crosby as a number 2 pass rusher is scary. It's very, very scary. Because Chandler Jones, Matt, we've talked about it, dozens of times, throughout our podcasting careers. Chandler Jones is probably the most underrated edge rusher in recent NFL history, if not all of NFL history. I mean, this guy gets no recognition, has as many sacks. I think he may have more sacks in his career than Von Miller. Super consistent, just comes in, dominates. And now you put him, and it's like, okay, you got 2 elite players rushing the passer. That's enough to get a couple of sacks and allow this offense to take over. And they've shown, I'm sorry, Chargers fans, they've shown they can beat the Chargers. They did it to make the playoffs in the biggest game that they had all season long. Derek Carr is a guy that I trust with the game on the line. And whether or not they make the playoffs, I don't think that takes away from if they were contenders for the Super Bowl. Because they may be a 9-win team this year. But they're going to be the best 9-win team in the NFL if they win only 9 games. They're more of a contender than I think any team in the AFC South. So for me, it's like, yeah, the AFC South, they're going to make the playoffs and stuff like that. They may beat, the Titans or the Colts. They may win 11, 12 games. But the Raiders are going to be better than them. So it's like, for me, I feel like they are contenders because in the playoffs, they can beat any team in the playoffs. And they can do it consistently. It's not, if Derek Carr gets hot, if Devontae Adams is playing well. It's like, no. They can beat any team, any given day. And you would expect them to beat almost any team, any given day. This is not a team I would want to play. This is a team that I am scared of. Even if I'm a team in the AFC West, there's no off games in that division because they're all teams that are trying to make the playoffs, and every single game between that division is going to feel like a playoff game. I hope we get a ton of flexed primetime games in that division because they're all going to be intense. They're all going to be great games, and they're all going to be really physical. I do think they're contenders because I think they have all the pieces to be in that Super Bowl contending team. It's going to come down to the end of the season, and if they make the playoffs, they're so easily a contender if they make the playoffs. And I think even if they don't, it's like, yeah, they were contending for the playoffs because they were contending with maybe a team that makes it to the Super Bowl. Them and the Broncos are fighting it out. And it's like, oh, the Broncos made the wild card. Oh, but then the Broncos made it to the Super Bowl because they were clearly better than the team they matched up against in the first round. This team is definitely a contender. Do not sleep on the Raiders. They are much improved, and they made the playoffs last year when they were not expected to. A lot of people expected the Chargers to run away in Week 18. Just dominate them. I think it was Sunday Night Football, not Monday Night Football, and they just went out there and the Raiders just surprised a lot of people. And it was like, no, that's Derek Carr. Derek Carr does that.
So I think that you bring up some of the improvements that they made over this offseason. Now, one, Chandler Jones, massive, right? But I think probably the biggest improvement that they made was in the coaching department. One, you had all the John Gruden stuff over the last few years, and that, and then you have an interim coach last season. But Josh McDaniels, I'm very interested to see how this offense looks just because you have some similarities, I feel like, to some of the New England offenses. You have, you're going to have a run game where they're not going to just use Josh Jacobs. They're going to use Zamir White. They're probably going to use Brandon Bolden, Kenyon Drake out of the backfield as well. So, they have some legit backs here. They have really good backs. They have some pretty solid players on the offensive line as well. Not like the same interior that they had a few years ago when Derek Carr had that like MVP caliber season, but still not too bad. And then you look at the receiving core, you have, the classic Patriots, small, skinny white guy that plays slot wide out in Hunter Renfrow, like your prototypical guy in the Josh McDaniels offense. And then you have Devontae Adams. You have a legit number one. You also have Darren Waller and Foster Moreau. And they're probably going to run a lot of two tight end sets. You're probably going to see Waller, flexed out wide, standing up once in a while. I'm probably going to see him like on the line of scrimmage as well, but like in tight, like in those kind of formations. But I'm very interested to see what this offense looks like because it should be a lot better than past seasons. And this is the best offensive mind that Derek Carr's played with. So I think that's another huge thing that you're talking about. One, you're getting the best wide receiver you've ever had, like that you've ever played with. Also, Derek Carr actually has played with Devontae Adams before, but you also have your best offensive coach as well. So you have those two things. I mean, and I think when we bring up the contender stuff, that's super. Like, if you look at their improvements, just like them to last year, yeah, they're a lot better. So I think I'm going to kind of jump ship a little bit and side with you with what you're saying. My biggest concern, I guess, is can they even make it out of the division, right? Like, can they even make it to the playoffs? That's the big question because they are a legit team. Now, you look at the defense, you look at their linebackers, not great. You look at their secondary, not great. But they do have a couple stud pass rushers, so that kind of helps cover some of your flaws on defense. And this is a team that's going to be in a lot of shootouts. So maybe if a couple guys emerge in the secondary or in the linebacking core, that could go a long way. But I don't know how confident I am, like in the back end of their defense, to be able to really hang with a lot of these teams. That's why I'm a little bit hesitant to say that they are, just because, okay, how do they stack up against the AFC West? That's my question for you. Because if I'm looking at it, if they jump one of those teams, they outperformed one of those teams' expectations that I have for them. I think that the Broncos, the Chiefs, and the Chargers should all be better than them. So it's hard when you look at it from that perspective. Do you think that I'm right there? Like, because I think there's areas where they're better, but like overall, like it's hard to be like, okay, everything combined, are you going to be better than these teams? Are you going to have a better record than these teams? And I don't know if I can say yes to any of those division rivals.
The thing I'll say, you talk about the back end of their secondary. They were super young last year. Trayvon Merrick, I felt like, was the best safety in last year's draft class. He's coming into year two. Devine Diablo was another safety in last year's draft class. Bigger body. He ended up converting to linebacker. And we'll see how he's able to make that transition. It's a very young secondary, with a lot of these players. And so if those guys are able to make the jump that they could potentially do, it's going to look very different because, a lot of times secondary players, they may struggle in their rookie year, but we don't know exactly if they're going to be able to make that. If they don't make that jump, they're going to struggle, against the Broncos, against the Chargers, against the Chiefs. But if Diablo, they can really make that transition to the players that they were drafted to be. I loved both of them coming out of the draft. I wanted the Ravens to draft both of them, actually. If they can make that transition and become the players that, they were looked at, scouted to become, this could be a really scary defense because Chandler Jones, Max Crosby, they're going to force bad passes. They're going to force interceptions. They're going to force, or at least interception opportunities. If this defense can start taking advantage of those, it's going to be really scary. But if they can't, then it's going to be a poor defense. And you're going to be able to just start mossing people and just start throwing it up because they may not be able to contend. But I feel like I'm expecting a jump from Trayvon Merrick, this year. And I'm really interested to see how Devine Diablo ends up making that transition over to linebacker because he was kind of a box safety hybrid. And we've seen a lot of players that make that switch from safety to linebacker. It ends up working out for their career because, of the, style of defense that they play. So, yes, there are concerns, but if things go as, I think the Raiders are projecting it to go, I think the secondary could look a lot better than maybe it looks on paper right now because they've only played 1 year.
Yeah, and Modric had some great tape at TCU, so he's a guy that definitely could emerge a lot. And second round safety, a lot of times like it takes a year or so at the safety position, especially just because you're going against dudes every single week. So it gets a lot harder, and if you're playing a lot of single high, well, all of a sudden, guys are getting downfield a lot quicker than they were in college ball, and especially at TCU, you're probably not going against like the craziest high caliber receivers that maybe you would if you played in, I don't know, SEC, or it kind of depends where you play. But I don't know, dude. I feel like for the Raiders, I like it. I also don't know too much about Diablo, but that is intriguing. And like you brought up that a lot of guys make that conversion. Um, but that's something that's kind of come on like the last few years, right? You didn't used to see that very often, where guys would be like a safety and then convert to linebacker. But there's been a lot of guys who've been able to do it recently. So I like that, like kind of like, okay, you have Jonathan Abram, like you might as well go and do this here. So if it works out, I mean, that definitely will help their linebacking core a lot. Denzel Perriman, not the best, but not, he's a serviceable linebacker. But like I said, like you got a couple star pass rushers that can kind of fix a lot of your flaws just because, okay, you get to a third down and one of them makes a fantastic play. And we see that. We've seen that in the NFL for quite some time where, you know, guys like you're banking on your stars to make plays. And last season, even for the Raiders, the defense was a lot worse. And Max Crosby ended up having a fantastic season where he had a bunch of very very clutch plays. But yeah, that's probably all I got on the Raiders. It's a very interesting team just heading into the season, just because you have so many like high end names, but you look at kind of their complementary guys, and it's not great.